Welcome to Whiskey and Literature, where we read and discuss the greatest books of all time, the best stories that have ever been put to paper, and maybe occasionally the worst books, and all those in between, because all the books are ours. I'm your host, Captain Mike, and I'm happy to have you with me. We live in an amazing time for readers, those lovers of literature. Just one generation before us, they didn't have this access to books. Right now, just about anybody, anywhere, at any time can read any book. They're all there available for you. If you think about it, you can read it. I was watching this movie, and in it, there was this girl on a train in Japan working as an assassin for the Yakuza family. And she was reading a book about a white girl in Japan who was an assassin who worked for the Yakuza family. I thought that was pretty funny. The circularity was hilarious, so I ordered the book and the sequel. I'm not going to be able to read it this year, but I'm looking forward to reading that book. The problem now with so many books that are available all the time and we have access to them is, which book should you read? What's the best book for you? And I know the best kind of means what you want it to mean. For an example, when my daughter turned 16, we went to the store to look for her to get a car. And she thought the best car for her was a 2017 Chevrolet Corvette with the Aero package and 700 horsepower. But since I was paying for the car and I was paying for the insurance, I decided the best car for her was a Chevrolet Spark with 98 horsepower. So best is very subjective, and the best book for you might not be the best book for me. But still, it's good to know, should you read this book or shouldn't you read the book? What's great for that is podcasts and YouTube, plenty of reviews and places you can go to find the books that you should and shouldn't read. Mrs. Captain and I have been in Barcelona, Spain, celebrating my 50th birthday. On the return flight, I watched a YouTube from Benjamin McAvoy. He has an online book club, I think it's called Hardcore Literature. And he had a video out that was titled The 50 Greatest Books of All Time. It piqued my interest as I've been a lifelong reader, and so I watched that video. I thought that I would have read quite a few more of the 50 greatest books of all time, but I'd only read 5. And so I decided right then and there that I was going to read all 50 of those greatest books of all time, all these classics. And I decided I was going to read them all in the same year, 2023. And I added 2 books for good measure, 52 books in 52 weeks. And that's how this channel was born, to hold myself accountable for the reading that I was doing. So I'm glad you're with me. We can go on this journey together. And I have some pros and cons and tips and tricks to help you read more, read better. And we're going to get to those in just a second. Before we get to these tips and tricks and the pros and cons, you might have noticed that the channel is called Whiskey and Literature. I have been a lifelong reader since I was a little kid until today. I was reading a book. But I've only recently been a drinker, enjoying whiskeys, etc. And so I thought I would share just a small part of this channel, a small part of the whiskey world with you. So we're going to have a whiskey of the week as we go through and review each book of the 52 books that I'm reading this year. If I can figure out how to do chapters on YouTube, I'm going to start a chapter before and end each clip on the whiskey. That way, if you don't want to watch it, you can skip over it. Or if you are here for the whiskey, you can skip to the whiskey. Today's whiskey of the week is High West Double Rye. I love all things Utah. I love High West. I've been to the distillery. The Double Rye is their workhorse. It's their go-to. It's fairly cheap, accessible. You can find it anywhere at your local liquor store, at the big box stores, wherever. It's an easy drink. You can throw it in a cocktail. You can have it neat. You can put some ice on it. If you're my wife, you might mix it in some Coke. And it's cheap enough that you can do that and not feel bad about it. So, Whiskey of the Week, High West Double Rye. Get some. First, we're going to talk about the cons of reading books. Why? Because there are no cons. Books are awesome. You should be turning those pages. If you're reading 52 books in 52 weeks, there are some challenges to that, some cons to reading at that velocity. Certainly, when I'm reading these classics, I have War and Peace, Ulysses, Don Quixote, Anna Karenina, and these books I do feel like I'm giving them a disservice reading them in only a week or two. Luckily, I have some small books, so I will have more than a week for some of these bigger books. But still, if you're reading Homer in 1 week or even 10 days, the Odyssey or the Iliad, you're doing a disservice. What I am hoping is that I do find some books this year that I would want to reread. As Nabokov says, one cannot read a book, one can only reread a book. I'm not certain I know exactly what he's talking about, but I feel like I almost understand what that means. I do enjoy rereading books. I have read Dune since I was in high school. I can remember specifically being in automotive class reading Dune, and I also read Dune this year. And I love to reread it and to revisit books, visit my friends and the characters, and go with them to the places that have the adventures with them. It doesn't diminish my enjoyment of the book, rereading The Wheel of Time, Dune, and certain other books that I have really enjoyed throughout the years. So if you're going to take on a reading challenge, I would suggest you read books that you like, that you want to read. Otherwise, you might start losing some motivation if you're reading a specific set of books that you didn't pick out. Now for the pros of reading books. First of all, books are awesome. So you should be reading, you should be turning those pages. You can live 1,000 lives through reading books. You can go on adventures. You can meet kings, queens, heroes, aliens. Go where you want. Do what you want through reading books. Do you want to educate yourself? I've read books on finance, history, cholesterol, diabetes, sex, chaos theory. If you want to educate yourself, read a book. Do you have kids? You should read to them. You shouldn't force them to read or really push reading on them. Let them find you reading. See that that's something that you enjoy doing. Buy them books for Christmas, Easter, for the birthdays. Let them find you reading. Share what you're reading with them and ask them about what they are reading. The more they read, the more their vocabulary is going to explode. The more their reading comprehension is going to grow. It's amazing. I loved reading with my kids many books, and they still love to read, and I love sharing that with them. And now for the tips and tricks. And the first one is to, of course, read what you like. Just like in drinking, drink what you like. In reading, read what you enjoy reading. Do you like Harlequin bodice rippers? Read them. Stephen King, Terry Goodkind, don't let anyone tell you these books are garbage. If you like to read them, enjoy them. Read them and read them again. I was talking to a coworker today about my whiskey. I don't know if it's called a collection, maybe. I have probably 75 bottles currently of whiskey at my house. And I was showing him some pictures and the shelves, and he saw a bottle of Fireball, and he was making fun of me for it. Just like someone might make fun of you for reading Terry Goodkind or whatever it is you like to read. But don't let them. If you like to read it, just read it. Enjoy it. But you should occasionally step out of your comfort zone. Don't just read science fiction. Don't just read fantasy or bodice rippers or Stephen King or whatever it is that you enjoy. Why don't you dip your toe into other stuff sometimes and see what else is out there? If someone tells me they don't know what they like to read, I say, well, what do you like? Do you play video games? Doom, Halo, Resident Evil? They're based on books. Read the books. Do you like movies? Do you like TV shows? What do you like? Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time. Have you seen The Expanse? Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, Conan the Barbarian, based on books. All these movies and TV series oftentimes have a whole universe of books that expand and expound on these stories, and you can go deep, well beyond what you can see in a movie through reading the books. Have you read any books specifically because they were based on a movie that you saw? I watched The Revenant, and I thought that was the craziest movie. I found the book, I read it, and the book was even crazier than the movie. I watched The Power of the Dog, I think in 2021. An interesting kind of movie, and I wondered, is that based on a book? And it was as well. And I really enjoyed the book. How about you? Have you watched a TV show or a movie and thought, oh man, I wonder if there's a book for this show, and gone and found it and read it and thought, that book was way better than the movie or the TV show? If you have, comment below. The second tip is get a Kindle, an e-reader. I actually really resisted getting a Kindle at first. I love books, I love paper, I love to turn pages. But I used to commute for work, and I would find myself going on 3, 5, 7-day trips, and I would carry 2 to 3 books at a time, and it became kind of cumbersome. And eventually I gave in to a Kindle, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a great experience reading. You can put more books on a Kindle than you could read in your lifetime. The battery lasts practically forever. Not really, but it lasts a long time. And the Kindle that I purchased specifically, I could fit in my back pocket. I think it's relatively affordable to read on the Kindle. I researched these 50 books, the 50 greatest books of all time on the Kindle, and I think you could buy all of them for roughly $160. A lot of these classic books are actually free on the Kindle. And the Kindle is also very convenient. Did you just finish a book and you want the next book in the series? Well, go to your phone, buy the next book, add it to your library, connect your Kindle to Wi-Fi if it doesn't have connectivity, and then download the book directly there. You don't have to wait for the book to come to your house or go find a bookstore. Super convenient. The third tip is use an audiobook service. I'm going to say Audible because that's the one that I use. Just like the Kindle, I kind of resisted and didn't want to use this. I wanted to read actual books. I was reading book 10 of The Wheel of Time, and it was kind of a slog. I was unmotivated and having a hard time turning those pages. We were going to go do a drive, so I downloaded Audible, downloaded book 10 of The Wheel of Time, just thinking, oh, I'll just read the next 2 books and then cancel the service. And 3 years later, I still use Audible almost on a daily basis. I don't think an audiobook is great for every genre of books. I don't think I would like to listen to Anna Karenina, A War and Peace, Ulysses, or any of these large books, certainly not textbooks, books on philosophy and self-help. I think I would prefer to have those books and read them in my hand. Specifically for this challenge this year, Huckleberry Finn, Alice in Wonderland, and some of my other more light books will be great to listen on Audible. And I will say that using Audible or an audiobook service, it does kind of change the experience that you have with the books. I've been reading Dune since I was in high school. I read it again last year and I listened to it on Audible, and it absolutely changed my experience with the book. The narrators were wonderful. In this book specifically, they had a narrator for each main character. The minor characters shared narrators, and there was a specific narrator for the non-speaking parts of the book, and it was amazing. Very well done. Some narrators aren't so great. I just finished Stephen King's Dark Tower series. Book 4.5 is read by Stephen King himself. And I will say that Stephen King, you should write books and not read them because he did not do a great job. I read Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, and he did a great job reading that story. Going back to Stephen King, we listened to Carrie, which was actually read by Sissy Spacek, who was the actress in the movie, the original Carrie movie, and that was a wonderful listen. I've also listened to several Audible originals, and while the stories might not have been the greatest stories, they do have a different kind of production for those. They have some sound effects. I listened to one with vampires, and I was doing some yard work with my earbuds in, listening to the story, and there would be footsteps or doors closing, and I'm looking around trying to find who was coming up behind me, and then realizing, no, it was just in the earbuds. That was a different kind of experience. I will say Audible is probably a more expensive way to read. You're paying the $15 a month for the service, and then you get 1 or 2 free books a month. And for example, I just read Stephen King's Dark Tower series, which was 8 books long. I think I had 3 credits, ended up buying 5 of the books. So with my Audible monthly fee, I still paid an additional $75 to listen to that series because of the velocity that I was reading the stories at. When I added up the 50 books, the 50 classics that I'm reading this year, I think on Audible it would have cost you about $540. So it can be a bit more expensive. My fourth tip, if you are booking on a budget, is to use local bookstores, used bookstores, thrift stores, and your local library, and friends and family. Can't get any cheaper than that. Go to your mom's house. Take some of her book. Go to a library. You probably have a library card at your house. Go there. I've spent many, many hours in libraries. I love them. Take your kids there. Enjoy the libraries. Use and support your local bookstores. Buy their books. And if you have books that you don't need anymore, take them there. Maybe you'll get a couple bucks and you'll help somebody else out. And actually for 2023, I'm reading 52 books in 52 weeks. So I went and bought all of the books. And buying 50 books at a time can get a bit expensive. We're lucky enough to have a Goodwill bookstore down in South Sarasota. And I found 15 of the books there, including War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and others for $3 each. It was a great find. Go support your local stores. Okay, guys, the time has come where I'm going to introduce to you the 50 greatest books of all time. And you might say, well, Captain, who decided that these 50 specific books are the greatest books of all time? And it's not someone, it's something. An algorithm actually decided these books are the 50 greatest books of all time. An algorithm is an equation, it's a set of rules, and this algorithm analyzed 130 lists of the greatest book, and it weighted each list for a relative authoritativeness, and then it looked into the list where each book specifically fell, which books were first, and how often they repeated in the list, and from that it made a list of the 100 greatest books of all time. Now we're only going to talk about the 50 greatest. So I'm going to categorize these books and then we're going to go through them one by one. So the plan for this year is I'm going to read all 50 of these greatest books of all time with 2 more thrown in so I can get 52 books in 52 weeks. So I plan to put out 1 video per week roughly as I go through each book and review and tell you how I feel about each book. So without further ado, let's get into the books. When I was thinking of different ways to categorize the books, one of the ways that came to me was male authors versus female authors. So we have the 50 greatest books of all time, and 8 of them are female authors. All the rest are male. That's 16%. I've read plenty of books from female authors. I enjoy them as much as any other book I have ever read. I've not read any of these books except To Kill a Mockingbird. And to be honest with you, a lot of these are not things that normally I would pick up off the shelf, though a lot of these books would fall under that category. But I'm as excited to read these books as any of them. I don't typically read books in the romance type section. A long time ago, I had a girl that we were arguing with when I was very much younger, and she was telling me that Anne of Green Gables, which was a much better movie than Star Wars, and I was like, no way. Obviously Star Wars is a better movie than Anne of Green Gables. And then I realized that she had seen Star Wars and she had seen Anne of Green Gables, and I hadn't. So what did I do? I watched it, and actually Anne of Green Gables is an awesome movie. It's very different than Star Wars. And you can appreciate it like that. It doesn't have to be better. It's just good for its own sake. So I'm hoping these books are, and I assume they are, because in the top 50 books, and I'm excited to read them. So I thought another interesting categorization would be where the authors are from. So we're going to go through that real quick and then go to the next one. Here we have the English, and they have 14 of the top 50 books from English authors. And we have the Americans coming in next with 13. Here we have the Russians, and they have 6 books. There are only 4 different authors. And then we have 1 book from Saudi Arabia. You have 2 books from South America, 1 Colombian and 1 from Argentina. You have a couple books here from the same author. He's an Irish author. We've heard of James Joyce. We have 1 Indian author, Salman Rushdie. The Divine Comedy, I believe that was written in Italian. Don Quixote, written in Spanish. I'm going to put both Homer and Virgil in the same pile. We have Thomas Mann and Franz Kafka, a couple Germans, and then we have French, and they have rounded out with 4 books. So interesting, I think, where all these come from. We don't have any from Australia, none from Africa, but I think it's a pretty interesting categorization. This next categorization is actually the one that inspired this YouTube channel. Because of these 50 books, these are the only ones that I've read. Alice in Wonderland, 1984. Catcher in the Rye, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Moby Dick. These are the 3 books that I tried to read. Heart of Darkness, War and Peace, and Catch-22. War and Peace I actually tried to read in high school. Didn't make it very far. All these other books I haven't read. That's why we're doing this challenge this year, to read all these classic books that I haven't read and to reread the ones that I have. Okay, so for our final category, we're just going to go 1 through 50 in a row. We're going to start with the greatest book of all time, and then go through number 50. That way at the end I can talk about the book that I will be reviewing next week. So without further ado, the greatest book of all time is Swann's Way by Marcel Proust. I don't know anything about this book other than it was French, 1913, and it's part of a 7-book series. I'm just going to read the first, Swann's Way, number 1. Number 2, Ulysses, James Joyce. He was an Irish. He's got 2 books on the list, written in 1922. I actually listened to a podcast about this book recently. It's by an Irish author about 2 Irish guys in one day of their life. Apparently it was banned when it was first published due to obscenity. So I don't know anything about it, but I'm excited to read it. Don Quixote. I've listened to a couple podcasts on this book. I haven't read it and have pretty mixed emotions about it from what I've understood. Published in 1605, Miguel Cervantes, Don Quixote, written in Spanish. Most of the reviews I've read are not great about it. I listened to a podcast about the 10 classic books you don't need to read, and Don Quixote is one of those. 900 pages. I'm not sure I'm looking forward to this one. 100 Years of Solitude, one of the 2 South American authors, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Spanish, 1967. Don't know anything about it. First American, F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Great Gatsby. I haven't seen the movie, haven't read the book. Nice and thin, 180 pages. I'm excited for it for that reason. It gives me some more grace as I read the bigger books. There's one book I have read. Herman Melville, Moby Dick. Call Me Ishmael, written in 1851. It's an epic. I don't remember much about it. I'm excited to reread this book. Here's one that I tried to read before. Sorry there's no cover on War and Peace. I bought this book from the Goodwill bookstore for $3. This is the Constance Garnett translation. And speaking of translations, I've never actually even thought about that. Because if you're reading Stephen King or Vince Flynn and Robert Jordan, and you're an American, you don't much care about translators because it wasn't translated. But I have realized that translators do matter. I don't know much still about it, but this is the Constance Garnett translation. This is the largest book that I'm reading this year, 1,136 pages. I'm not really daunted by large books. I've read plenty of large and in-charge books, but I'm grateful for the thin books that I have this year because they will give me some grace as I'm reading these monsters. Hamlet, was I supposed to read this in high school? Maybe. Did I? No. Finished around 1601. English, it's a tragedy. Hamlet. Number 9, we have our first Homer, the Odyssey, written in 8th century BC, Greek, epic poetry. I'm actually really excited to read both the Homer, the Odyssey, and the Iliad this year. I have not read it if I was supposed to in high school. Well, I didn't. It's a different translator, the Odyssey and the Iliad, so that's interesting. But I am excited to read these. Book 10, Gustave Flaubert, Madame Bovary. We've all heard of this book. I don't know what it's about, though. Written in 1856, French. And it's only 190 pages. Again, that's nice. Dante. I'll be honest, I'm not super excited to read this book. Written roughly 1321, number 11 on the list, in Italian. I don't really know what it's about, but I'm kind of scared, actually, of this book. 12, Lolita. I haven't seen the movie. I haven't read the book. We all kind of know the story. Written in 1955. An interesting fact, if you do listen to this book on Audible, it's read by Jeremy Irons, who took the role in the movie of the abuser, the guy. And even though he was Russian, Nabokov, he wrote this book in English, so it's not a translation. I think that's interesting. I'm going to read the next 2 books, or I'm going to talk about them together. They're both, and I've been practicing this name here, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, and The Brothers Karamazov, book 13 and 14. I'm actually excited to read these books. If you're a fan of Jordan Peterson, you should read these because he really enjoys them. They're philosophical novels, literary fiction. I don't know a whole lot about them other than they deal with, well, crime and punishment, your decisions you make, and the consequences that follow. So I've listened to a couple podcasts on them, and I am excited to read both of those books. Emily Bronte, another book from the Goodwill bookstore for $3, Wuthering Heights. I haven't read it, written in 1847. It's a Gothic tragedy. And her sister's on the list as well. Catcher in the Rye, number 16. Written in 1951 by an American. It's realistic fiction. I'm excited to read this one. J.D. Salinger. Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice, written in 1813. She's English, and it's a romance novel. Not something normally that I would read. I couldn't tell you any romance novel that I've read, to be honest with you. But I'm excited to read it. It's a well-known title. I also got this for $3 at the book. Here's a fun read. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, written in 1884 by the American Mark Twain. I've read this. It's a nice copy. It was given to me by Mrs. Captain. Excited to read it again. Here's a book I'm not actually super excited about reading. Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy. Written in 1878, he said it was his first true novel. I don't know why, but I'm just not really excited about it. And what will be nice is after reading that one, we have a nice small Lewis Carroll, Alice Adventures in Wonderland. 230 pages. It's a fantasy. I'm excited to reread that, especially after reading Anna Karenina. The Iliad, another Homer. Again, I'm excited to read it. It's a different translator than the other one. It's epic poetry written a long time ago. These are our 2 oldest books for this challenge. Virginia Woolf, she's got 2 books of the greatest 50 books of all time. To the Lighthouse, written in 1927. Here's a book I tried to read, and I can't remember why I couldn't get through the book, but I'm going to get through it this time. Joseph Heller, Catch-22, American, 1961. Also, bookstore, $3. Heart of Darkness, another one that I tried to read. He's Polish-English, written in 1902, a novella. This book was the inspiration for Apocalypse Now. It's nice and thin. I'm going to get through it this time. The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner, American, 1929. I don't know anything about this book. I've heard about it. It's a Southern Gothic novel. 1984. I've read this one. It's been a long time. I'm excited to read it again. An English novel from 1949. A dystopian. Charles Dickens, Great Expectations, 1861, English novel. I think we all kind of know the story. I've not read the book. I'm excited to read it now. This book I'm actually kind of excited for. 1001 Arabian Nights. Not an author. It's just folk tales from the Arabian Peninsula, from the middle. Actually, this book is newer, or it's younger than I thought it would. I thought it was going to be older, but it's from the 8th to the 14th century. Bunch of folk tales. I'm excited to read it. Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, 1939 American. This book won the Pulitzer Prize. We're excited to read it. It's going to be a good read. Another Faulkner, Absalom, and I know absolutely nothing about this book other than 1936 Southern Gothic. The Invisible Man. I've read The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. I haven't read the one by Ralph Ellison, which is on this list. I'm going to. I don't know anything about it other than it's in the African American literature from 1952. Also, bookstore, $3. Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. I have read this book. It's been a while. We've seen the movie, 1961, Southern Gothic. Franz Kafka, The Trial, 1925, German. Apparently he was inspired by Dostoevsky, so I'm going to read this one first, and then later Dostoevsky, and it'll be interesting to compare them to. Also a nice, thin book. Should be a good read. French book, Stendhal, The Red and the Black, 1830. I know nothing about this book at all. Middlemarch by George Eliot, otherwise known as Mary Ann Evans. A lot of these female authors, when they originally published their books, they did it under a pen name or a pseudonym. And for some reason, Mary Ann Evans has always been George Eliot. It was an English novel, published in 1872, and I've listened to a podcast on this book, and I'll be honest, I am not excited to read it after listening to the podcast. It's the opposite of Seinfeld, which was a show about nothing. This is a book about everything, and it's quite the large book, 600 pages. The podcast did not treat it very well, and it kind of made me not excited to read it. So we'll see. Gulliver's Travels, number 36 on the list, English from 1726. It's quite a bit older than I would have thought, just if I was just thinking about it. 1726 was a long time ago. Gulliver's Travels, nice, easy read. Toni Morrison, Beloved, an American novel. I don't know anything about this book. It makes me think of Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if it was one of Oprah Winfrey's Book of the Month. If you know, was it? Comment below. Another Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, English novel from 1925. And apparently this one, like Ulysses, is one day. But it's a lot shorter than Ulysses. But also one day in Mrs. Dalloway's life. Another Russian, Anton Chechov. This is a collection of his stories. We're at number 39 now. So this was not published, or it's not one story, it's a collection, and he passed away in 1904, so sometime before then all these stories were written. I'm excited to read it. This one I'm excited for because it's only 76 pages long. It's Absurdism, French, The Stranger by Albert Camus. I love the cover. I think it looks awesome. And I don't know anything about this book, but I'm excited to read it. Here's the other Bronte sister, Jane Eyre. English, 1847. It's a Gothic romance novel. I don't know the story. Don't know anything about it. The Aeneid of Virgil, by Virgil, written in Latin, an epic poem. It's only 116 pages long, so I'm excited to read this one as well, along with the homework. This book I'm actually really excited to read. I lived in Argentina for a couple of years. I love Argentina, and Jorge Luis Borges is from Argentina. I don't know anything about him. This is a collection of his fiction, and so number 43 on the list. Ernest Hemingway, clocking in at 44. The Sun Also Rises, an American, written in 1926. Getting towards the end here. 45. Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, written in 1850. $5.97 at the bookstore. Another old book, 1767, Tristram Shandy by Laurence Sterne. It's a novel, and it's inspired by Don Quixote. 46. 47, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. This is an American. It's a book of poetry, only 89 pages long, written in 1855. I have never read a book of poetry. If it's any good when I'm done, I'll give it to my mom. She likes poetry. 3 books left. Thomas Mann, Magic Mountain, German, from 1924. I don't know anything about this book. Number 48. And our last two, we have James Joyce, another one of his, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. This was his first novel, and he's Irish, from 1916. I actually listened to a podcast on Ulysses, and they talked about this one as well, briefly, and I don't remember what they said at all. It's a nice, thin book. Should be a good read. It'll be my second book. So next week. Here we go. Number 50 on the list. Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children. Looking at the books for this list, I had never even heard of this book. I've heard of Salman Rushdie. All I knew about him was Satanic Verses and a fatwa. They wanted to kill him. But I've never heard of this book, but apparently it won the Booker Prize and the Booker of Booker. So, should be a nice read. Apparently it's magic realism about the when India separated from Britain. So I'm excited to read it. We'll see how it goes, and look for this review next week. Well, thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you like this video, comment, subscribe below, and look for my videos in the future. For now, my friends, keep turning those pages and stay thirsty.